Not many British servicemen have the honour of being awarded the Victoria Cross. But how about being awarded the Victoria Cross and the German Iron Cross as well? Incredible as it may seem, one British soldier holds that unique and intriguing distinction. This is the story of William Manley, the only man ever to have been awarded the VC and the Iron Cross. William Manley was born in Dublin, Ireland in 1831. He was the second son of Reverend Nicholas Manley. His maternal grandfather was a doctor who had served in the Army Medical Staff, which today is known as the Royal Army Medical Corps. Young William followed in his grandfather's footsteps and embarked on a career in medicine, and by 1851 had become a member of the Royal College of Surgeons. He continued to follow his grandfather, Dr. Brown's career, by also joining the Army Medical Staff in 1854, the year that Great Britain entered the Crimean War. He was attached to the Royal Artillery and almost immediately sent to the war zone. The Royal Artillery participated in the siege of Sevastopol, the main Russian naval base in the Black Sea. Manley served at Sevastopol for the entirety of the 11-month siege. Without covering all the ground that I've covered in other talks, the Crimean War pitted the Russian Empire against a combined army consisting of the British, the French, the Ottomans, and later on Piedmont Sardinia in Italy. The battles which tend to be remembered in Britain are Alma, Balaclava with the charge of the Light Brigade, and Inkerman were all fought as part of this campaign to capture Sevastopol. Eventually, in late August 1855, a huge artillery bombardment preceded a major Allied assault on the Russian defences. The British attack on the Redan fortifications was repulsed with serious losses. Those of you who've watched or listened to my talk about Sir Evelyn Wood VC might recall that he was seriously injured in this battle. The French assault on the Malakoff fort, however, was a success. With their defences breached, the Russians abandoned Sevastopol and the war in the Crimean Peninsula cooled down. The following year, a peace treaty was signed. In 1864, still attached to the Royal Artillery, William Manley was sent to New Zealand. Ever since the 1840s, the British had fought a series of wars with the indigenous Maoris, referred to nowadays as the New Zealand Wars, although previously called the Maori Wars. Despite their limited numbers, the Maoris proved to be formidable adversaries. They had quickly adapted their traditional weapons to include muskets, which they used with considerable accuracy, and they also adapted their traditional strongholds to withstand attacks by the British. It was in front of one of these strongholds, or Pahs, in the Bay of Plenty area on North Island, that 32-year-old William Manley found himself on the morning of the 29th of April, 1864. The British commander, Sir Duncan Cameron, was confident of victory, and so he should be. His force of 1,650 men totally dwarfed the 230 Maori defenders in the stronghold, which went by the name of Gate Pah. Whilst there were some European settlers accompanying him, most of Cameron's men were drawn from regular professional regiments, principally the 68th Regiment, later the Durham Light Infantry, and the 43rd Regiment. The 43rd would become the Monmouthshire Light Infantry, which in turn would become part of the Ox and Bucks Light Infantry, who stormed Pegasus Bridge on D-Day 1944. But that's a long way in the future. Back on the 29th of April 1864, the 43rd, along with the 68th, were accompanied by a contingent from the Naval Brigade, off HMS Harrier. Also present were 11 Armstrong field guns as well as mortars and howitzers, all operated by the Royal Artillery. And with those gunners was Surgeon William Manley. With all that firepower, the result was never in doubt. The night before the battle, 9 British officers, including Manley, dined together, and I'll come back to that dinner in a little while. On the 29th of April 1864, the Battle of Gate Pah commenced with a bombardment by the Royal Artillery guns. Confident that the Maori positions had now been softened up, Sir Duncan Cameron ordered the 43rd and Naval Brigade under Commander Edward Hay to storm the fortification. The ensuing assault by the British on Gate Pah was a disaster. As the British closed in on the Pah, they suddenly came under sustained and well-concealed rifle fire. One of the casualties of that rifle fire was Commander of the Royal Naval Brigade, 29-year-old Edward Hay. Mortally wounded, he was picked up by one of his sailors from HMS Harrier, Samuel Mitchell. Under Maori fire, Mitchell struggled back towards safety. En route, he met William Manley, and together the two men carried Hay back to the British lines, but their efforts were in vain. Commander Hay died shortly afterwards. Manley now ran towards the Pah to assist any other wounded men from the 43rd or the Naval Brigade, and through the battle he ferried injured men to safety. Eventually, with their losses mounting and the Maoris not budging an inch, the storming party fell back. William Manley was the last officer to leave the Pah. Over 31 of the British assault party were killed and a further 80 wounded. Now, do you remember that I mentioned that Manley had dined with 8 other officers the night before the battle? Well, he was the only one not killed or wounded at the Battle of Gate Pah. The Maoris lost somewhere between 19 and 32 killed and just 25 wounded. More importantly, they still held the Pah. That night, under the cover of darkness, the victorious Maoris quietly evacuated the stronghold. For his actions rescuing the wounded whilst under fire, Manley was awarded the Victoria Cross. So incidentally was Samuel Mitchell. The war between the British and the Maoris went on, and Manley was to serve at the storming of 4 more Pahs. He was also to rescue more injured men, most significantly when a Royal Artillery gunner fell overboard on a river and Manley dived in to rescue him. For that rescue, he was to be awarded the Royal Humane Society's Bronze Medal. He finished the war with the rank of Staff Surgeon, which equates to a Commander in the Royal Navy or Lieutenant Colonel in the Army. Earning the Victoria Cross is no mean feat in the British Armed Forces. In the 170 years since its inception, less than 1,400 men have had the honour. 27 men serving in the Royal Army Medical Corps or its predecessor have been awarded the VC, including 2 of 3 men to have been awarded the medal twice, Noel Chavasse and Arthur Martin-Leake VC. I've told the stories of both of these men in the past. I've also told the story of the other double VC recipient, who ironically, based upon this story, was from New Zealand, Charles Upham. Check them out if you haven't come across them yet. So, as I said, William Manley being awarded the Victoria Cross was one heck of an achievement. But now we come to his unique part in military history. In 1870, the Franco-Prussian War broke out. The Prussians invaded France and in a lightning 6-month campaign besieged Paris and defeated the armies of Emperor Louis Napoleon, the great Napoleon Bonaparte's nephew and indeed father of the Prince Imperial who was killed in the Zulu War. Over 180,000 soldiers from both sides were killed in those 6 months, and a further 230,000 were injured. Whilst the other powers in Europe stood back from entering the fray, many from their populations were appalled by the scale of the casualties and the suffering in the besieged city of Paris. Across the continent, volunteers came forward to alleviate the suffering. Ambulance corps were established to support the wounded on both sides in the campaign. Despite the name, the Ambulance Corps, it was not a unit for ferrying wounded soldiers in wagons. It principally provided and ran field hospitals. Future British Army General Herbert Kitchener joined an ambulance corps assisting the French wounded. Meanwhile, the 26-year-old professor of philosophy at the University of Basel, Friedrich Nietzsche, joined a similar ambulance trying to help the Prussian wounded. On the other side of the Channel, the British Ambulance Corps was established with £300,000 in donations flooding in from the public. And it was to this corps that the recently married William Manley volunteered. In the previous year, he had married Maria Elizabeth Darton at Sheerness in Kent, and they were to produce a whole brood of children, one of whom would become a lieutenant colonel in the British Army, whilst another would die in 1901 whilst accompanying the British expedition to Peking during the Boxer Rising in China. Manley was placed in command of B Division of the British Ambulance Corps, which was attached to the 22nd Division of the Prussian Army. The British surgeon marched somewhere between 200 and 300 miles with the Prussians as they campaigned in northern and eastern France. He was in the thick of the fighting, trying to rescue the wounded at 4 major engagements in late November, early December 1870, including the battles of Châteauneuf and Orléans. His bravery in rescuing wounded soldiers whilst under fire was recognised by the Prussian Crown Prince Frederick himself. Frederick was married to the eldest daughter of Queen Victoria. His father, Wilhelm I of Prussia, would, in January 1871, be proclaimed as Emperor of the newly unified Germany at the Hall of Mirrors in Versailles. Frederick would succeed his father as Emperor of Germany, but he died after a reign of just 99 days at the age of 57. He would be succeeded by his young and headstrong son, Kaiser Wilhelm II, and the rest, as they say, is history. Anyway, Back to late 1870. Crown Prince Frederick was so impressed by Manley's bravery and dedication to saving the wounded that he recommended that his father award the British surgeon with Prussia's highest military medal, the Iron Cross. And thus, William Manley was now presented with the Iron Cross, second class, to go alongside his Victoria Cross. With the Prussians victorious in the field, the French sought an armistice. The Prussians agreed and the siege of Paris was lifted. Manley went into the French capital with supplies for their hospitals, an act which now earned him a decoration from the French Red Cross. After the conclusion of the Franco-Prussian War, Manley returned to his post as a medical officer in the British Army. Later in the 1870s, he would be present in the Second Anglo-Afghan War, where he was present at the occupation of Kandahar, and in 1882 he accompanied General Sir Garnet Wolseley's expedition to Egypt. Promoted to the rank of Deputy Surgeon General, he was Principal Medical Officer to the 2nd Division at the Battle of Tel el-Kebir. Finally, in 1884, his 30 years of service to his country came to an end. He retired with the honorary rank of Surgeon General. Having been made a Companion of the Order of the Bath and a Knight of the Order of St. John of Jerusalem, more often known today as St. John Ambulance, he moved to Cheltenham's Spa on the edge of the Cotswolds. He spent the rest of his days living in Lansdowne Crescent in the town. William Manley VC died of diabetes a month before his 90th birthday in 1901. He's buried in the local cemetery. To this day, he holds the unique distinction of being the only man ever to have been awarded both the Victoria Cross and the Iron Cross. Well, thanks for watching, and I hope you enjoyed that members-only exclusive video. I did promise that you'd be getting one very soon. A big thanks to all of you who've joined my membership channel, including Brenda, Michael, and the History Buff, whatever your real name is. Keep well, and I'll see you very soon.